I never understood why HOA Karen was so obsessed with the keys to my old storage shed. Out of all the things happening in our neighborhood, that rusty building sitting behind my property seemed like the last thing anyone would care about. Yet every few weeks, she found a new excuse to ask about it. At first, I thought she was just being nosy. Then her requests became demands, and her demands slowly turned into threats involving HOA violations and inspections. My name is Ethan Walker, and I had lived in that neighborhood for nearly 8 years without a single problem. But the moment Karen Reynolds became HOA president, everything changed. What started as annoying letters and surprise inspections soon became a strange obsession centered on one locked shed. Looking back now, the warning signs were everywhere. What I didn't know was that Karen wasn't interested in the shed itself. She was terrified of what might eventually connect back to her. And when police finally searched her garage, they found something so unexpected that the entire neighborhood was left stunned. When Karen Reynolds first became president of our HOA, most people thought she would be a positive change. She was organized, attended every community meeting, and constantly talked about improving property values. The neighborhood newsletter suddenly doubled in length, new regulations appeared almost every month, and Karen seemed determined to involve herself in everyone's business. At first, it was mostly harmless. People rolled their eyes when another reminder about mailbox colors appeared in their inboxes, but nobody considered her a serious problem. That changed once she focused her attention on my property. The shed sat near the back edge of my land, partially hidden behind several large trees. It wasn't attractive, but it wasn't falling apart either. The structure had belonged to the previous owner, and I mainly used it to store gardening tools, seasonal decorations, and old equipment. Honestly, I barely opened it more than once or twice a month. Yet somehow Karen became fascinated by it. The first letter arrived claiming the HOA needed to conduct a routine inspection of all outdoor structures. That sounded reasonable enough, except none of my neighbors received the same notice. I checked. Karen insisted the inspection required full access to the shed's interior. I politely declined and asked for documentation authorizing such access. Strangely, the request disappeared. A few weeks later, another letter arrived. This time Karen claimed someone had reported unusual activity around the shed. According to her, the HOA needed immediate entry to verify compliance with community regulations. Again, there was no evidence, no witness statements, and no explanation. Just another request for the keys. That was when things started feeling weird. Bro, hearing this years later still makes no sense to me. Out of every house in the neighborhood, why was she so focused on one old storage building? Most HOA presidents spend their energy measuring grass height or arguing about fence colors. Karen seemed completely fixated on gaining access to that shed. Over the next several months, her behavior became increasingly aggressive. She photographed the structure from different angles. She sent violation notices for issues that didn't exist. She even showed up during a thunderstorm claiming she needed emergency access due to an alleged drainage concern. Every excuse somehow led back to the same question: could she have the keys? Meanwhile, I began noticing other odd things around the neighborhood. Several residents complained that small items had disappeared from their properties. Nothing major. A power washer here. Some landscaping equipment there. A generator from someone's backyard. Individually, the incidents seemed unrelated. People assumed the items had been misplaced, borrowed, or stolen by random thieves passing through. What caught my attention was Karen's reaction. Every time someone mentioned missing property during HOA meetings, she immediately redirected the conversation. She always had a reason why it wasn't worth discussing. Looking back, that detail feels incredibly important. Then one Saturday morning, I walked outside and found fresh footprints near my shed. The ground had been soaked by rain the night before, making the impressions impossible to miss. Someone had circled the building several times and spent considerable time near the door. There were also scratch marks around the lock. I genuinely couldn't believe what I was looking at. At that moment, a thought crossed my mind that would completely change everything. Maybe Karen didn't simply want access to the shed. Maybe she was searching for something. That discovery pushed me from mildly annoyed to genuinely concerned. The footprints and scratch marks could have belonged to anyone, but combined with Karen's months-long obsession, the timing felt impossible to ignore. Instead of confronting her directly, I decided to gather evidence. The very next day, I installed several security cameras around my property, including one aimed directly at the shed. For the first week, nothing happened. Then, just after midnight on a Thursday, one of the cameras captured movement. A figure entered my backyard from a side path that connected several properties. The person wore dark clothing and kept their head down, clearly trying to avoid identification. For they walked straight to the shed, examined the lock, and spent several minutes looking through the windows before leaving. The footage wasn't clear enough for a positive identification, but one detail stood out immediately. The person knew exactly where they were going. There was no wandering around the yard. No hesitation. No curiosity about anything else on the property. Their entire focus was the shed. A few days later, another strange event occurred. During an HOA board meeting, Karen unexpectedly brought up my shed in front of dozens of residents. She claimed multiple homeowners had expressed concerns about what might be stored inside. The accusation came completely out of nowhere. When several neighbors said they had never raised such concerns, Karen quickly changed the subject. That moment raised even more questions. Why was she trying so hard to create suspicion around a building nobody cared about? Then things escalated again. One afternoon, a neighbor named Mark stopped by my house. He looked nervous. After making sure nobody else was around, he told me he had seen Karen loading unfamiliar equipment into her garage late at night. According to him, some of the items looked remarkably similar to tools recently reported missing throughout the neighborhood. Bro, when he said that, everything suddenly felt connected. The missing equipment. Karen's strange behavior. The repeated attempts to access my shed. For the first time, I started wondering if Karen wasn't searching for something hidden inside the shed. What if she was terrified that something hidden somewhere else could eventually expose her? And within days, a single phone call would set off a chain of events that nobody in the neighborhood saw coming. The turning point came faster than anyone expected. A week after my conversation with Mark, another resident reported a missing commercial-grade pressure washer. Unlike the previous incidents, this wasn't a small item that could simply be misplaced. The equipment was expensive, highly visible, and had disappeared from a locked storage area. Frustrated by months of similar incidents throughout the neighborhood, the owner finally contacted local police. At first, the investigation seemed routine. Officers took reports, documented the missing property, and interviewed several residents. Nobody expected anything dramatic to happen. Then a detective noticed something interesting. Many of the theft reports shared a common detail. Several victims had discussed their missing property during HOA meetings shortly before the items completely vanished from attention. And almost every one of those discussions had been redirected or dismissed by Karen. That coincidence was enough to attract closer scrutiny. Meanwhile, my camera footage became part of the investigation. Although the nighttime recordings couldn't clearly identify the person near my shed, they demonstrated a repeated pattern of suspicious activity focused on my property. The officers became curious about why someone would spend months attempting to access an ordinary storage building. Then came the moment that changed everything. Police obtained legal authorization to inspect Karen's property after additional evidence connected multiple missing items to her residence. What they discovered inside her garage left the entire neighborhood stunned. Shelves were packed with equipment belonging to other residents. Power tools. Landscaping machinery. Generators. Pressure washers. Even specialty equipment that homeowners had reported missing months earlier. Many items still contained identifying markings and serial numbers. I genuinely couldn't believe it. The woman who constantly lectured everyone about community standards had apparently been collecting property from the very people she claimed to represent. But the strangest discovery wasn't the stolen equipment. 6 investigators also found detailed notes about dozens of homes throughout the neighborhood. Karen had maintained records on residents, their schedules, storage locations, and valuable equipment. Among those documents were multiple references to my shed. Pages and pages of references. As officers pieced everything together, the explanation finally emerged. Months earlier, Karen had apparently convinced herself that one of the missing items she had taken might somehow be connected to my property. She became obsessed with the idea that evidence linking various thefts could be hidden inside my shed. The more paranoid she became, the more desperate she grew to gain access. The irony was unbelievable. There had never been anything inside the shed except ordinary household storage. Karen spent months harassing me, issuing violations, conducting fake inspections, and trying to obtain my keys because she feared being exposed by evidence that didn't even exist. And in the end, her obsession created exactly the attention that led investigators straight to her garage. Once the investigation became public, the neighborhood changed almost overnight. Residents who had spent months doubting themselves finally received answers. One by one, recovered items were returned to their owners. Equipment that people thought was gone forever suddenly reappeared, and the growing list of victims made it clear just how long the situation had been going on. Karen immediately resigned from her HOA position, but by then the damage was already done. The board appointed temporary leadership while authorities continued sorting through evidence and documenting recovered property. For the first time in years, HOA meetings focused on actual neighborhood concerns instead of endless complaints and questionable violations. As for me, the letters stopped. The inspections stopped. The constant attention on my property disappeared completely. What felt almost surreal was finally opening the shed one afternoon and realizing how much stress that little building had caused. Inside were the same gardening tools, holiday decorations, and dusty storage bins that had always been there. Nothing mysterious. Nothing valuable. Nothing connected to any investigation. Yet that ordinary shed had accidentally become the center of Karen's paranoia. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, but people never forgot what happened. Every time someone walked past my backyard, they looked at that old shed a little differently, remembering how one person's obsession had ultimately revealed far more about themselves than anyone else. Looking back, this story still blows my mind. Karen spent so much energy trying to control everyone around her that she ended up exposing herself. That's exactly how entitlement often works in real life. People become so focused on what others might discover that they create the very situation they fear most. The craziest part is that if she had simply left my shed alone, nobody would have thought twice about it. Instead, her relentless obsession raised questions that eventually unraveled everything. In the end, the locked shed never contained a secret. The real secret was sitting in her own garage the entire time.